This is my audience for my informative speech. We're going to start off today by taking a rewind back to a kindergarten exercise known as word and image pairing. Today you'll see in our exercise that number 7 is left blank. We're going to come back to number 7, but first, for an example, we'll understand that number 8 is seen as a rug and number 9 is seen as a log. These are pretty simple images to kind of digest, but number 7 is a little bit more to comprehend. We have one kindergarten in a current study that answered with the answer of art. You might be thinking that the answer would be mud, of course. But what is art can mean something completely different to one person as it does to someone else. That's the topic we're here to evaluate today. We're going to take something as nebulous as art and support it with concrete information to kind of break down and understand the building blocks of a great principle and interactive part of our lives today. When we go through our topics, we'll cover elements of art, the principles of art, the history of art, and why it's all of value. Personally, I find art as a huge value in my life, as I specifically am pursuing a career in art education. So let's start off with defining art. Art can be reflected in our opening activity, again, as something that can be perceived by all people as different meanings. We get what we give. So let's kind of go to something a little bit more specific. What, who, and why makes up art? The what can be seen as what is being created. The who is the creator or an artist. The why is the reflection of a meaning. Why was the art created? Why was something important to an artist enough to create something? Now, we'll see all of these things reflected through art elements. How is the display created exactly? You might ask. Well, the building blocks, of course. That includes line, shape, form, value, space, color, texture. Now, line is a point moving through space. Shape is something flat and 2D, limited to height and width. This is not the same as form. As form, you see a 3D image and it also includes depth. When we move on to value, we see a different scale of light and dark colors. You can see different hues through different values as well. Space, however, is a positive or negative. There are things inside and outside of an image that need to be considered. Color can be considered as a hue, the name of a color. It can also be defined as the value like we discussed earlier, and also the intensity. Is the color very bright and high intensity, or is it dull and relaxed with a low intensity? Now, the combination of all of these elements is understood through different techniques. Now, when you see a different style of art, you wonder, how did they incorporate that all together? How did they create that? Well, they use different principles of art. The ability to combine some, all, or a couple of different elements can be seen throughout a bunch of history movements as well. We'll get to that in a moment, but first let's define what we see as principles so that we can understand later those iconic pieces. Rhythm is the first principle. It is when you carefully select and place something in an image to create a visual tempo. Balance is the equilibrium within a piece. You'll see symmetrical or asymmetrical items. Contrast is comparing the elements to stress a difference within something. However, a harmony is when something comes together and you view the similarities. Variety is specifically the diversity amongst a piece. You'll see a difference as well as similarities. They all come together with variety. Now movement, now that one's a fun one. You'll see how the artist uses different techniques and elements to create a different guiding path of the viewer. You'll be guided through an image to see the work in specific highlighted areas. Now, as we move on to art history, we're going to go through a couple different time periods. As we go through these time periods, I want you to try and reflect on what the definition of art was. When we went over the definition of art, we broke it down into the what, who, and why. Now, the what in these cases will be the art that the time period reflects. The who will be those artists that were very iconic during those time periods. And the why will be the events that influenced those artists. We will also come up with some particularly practiced things through those images. You'll go ahead and see that I've pointed out some elements and principles used in these iconic times. Let's go ahead and start off with the Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic time periods. This took place in 30,000 BC all the way to 2000 BC. The elements and principles we see are line and texture. This is done through the Cueva de los Menos in Argentina. This cave painting is a bunch of hands. You'll see early humans used a bunch of art to communicate. As we go forward to the classical period of 500 BC to 500 AD, you'll see form. Form is done through sculpture. The Greeks loved sculptures, and that's probably what you think of first when you think of a Greek. This sculpture, Youth, from Athens in 480 BC, is the example we use. At this time period, they really wanted to honor gods. This was a great period all about religion, and that religion continues as we go to medieval time. Medieval period is from 500 AD to 1400 AD. Religious paintings are a big one here. Masta is the painting of choice. Christianity was a huge part of this time period. It was going all across Europe, and you'll see a bunch of different historical events that coincide with this time frame. Balance is something that we really need to focus on. That's an element and principle in this picture. Renaissance time is when we see the murals. Murals are a creation of Adam, who was done by Michelangelo, and it reflects individuals versus the religion as a whole. Movement can not only reflect the time frame, but also this image, as you see a movement from one person to the next. In neoclassical, we see value. Darker images are the type of art that are most common at this time frame. Mr. David is the artist who is a well-renowned artist of neoclassical period art. Now, all of these darker images are influenced by political time frame leaders like Napoleon. Hopefully, currently we won't get too dark with our images due to our political standings. Now, we'll move on to Romanticism and its harmony through the glimpse of less structure and more nature shots. And then we'll also see some realism. This is a huge switch over to color. This is coming out of something that was a little dreamy with the Romanticism, and it's becoming a little bit more structured. Now, we'll go back to Impressionism and Expressionism. This is the late 18th century all the way up to modern time, and you'll see everything from the Starry Night, brushstrokes, and why in the industrial movement was impactful, all the way to Jackson Pollock in his splatter paint. Now, after reviewing all of the art history, the elements, and the principles, we can see that all of art is very impactful.